योगेन चित्तस्य पदेन वाचाम् मलं शरीरस्य च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोत्तं प्रवरं मुनीनां पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिरानतोऽस्मि आबाहुपुरुषाकारं शङ्खचक्रासिधारिणं सहस्रशिरसं श्वेतं प्रणमामि पतञ्जलिं गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुः साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः हरिः ओम. So in the previous session we looked at Sutra 3.18 which dealt with samskaras and then the Sanyama on samskaras. Today we proceed to Sutra 3.19 which talks about the fourth of the Sanyamas covered in the chapter. It is a short sutra, short bhashya, and then that is related to the subsequent Sutra 3.20. So we'll probably look at them together. So Sutra 3.19, which we'll start looking at today, is as follows. It says, pratyayasya paracittajñānam. Pratyayasya paracittajñānam. Now, pratyaya, as we have seen, has multiple meanings, but in this context and in most of the Yoga Sutra text, pratyaya refers to the jnanam or the alambanam of the chitta or the cognitive imprint on the chitta, the cognition in the chitta. Pratyayaha. So pratyayasya. Pratiyate artho anena iti pratyayaha. Chittam tasya. So essentially, it is jnanam, the knowledge, that is the superimposition of that exists in the chitta. So that is the cognitive imprint, and that is pratyaya. So now, when a yogi has a sanyama on the pratyaya, sometimes some commentators will also equate the pratyaya to mean chitta, because it is a sort of an essential part of the chitta, the cognitive imprint. So the sanyama on the chitta leads to a certain siddhi. So as we are looking at all the sutras, they are talking about such and such sanyama leads to such and such siddhi. So here the sanyama on pratyaya will lead to paracittajñānam, which is knowledge of the parachitta. Parachitta meaning chitta other than one's own chitta. Okay, of a different chitta. So jnanam of the different chitta is what arises from the sanyama on pratyaya. So that is the meaning of the sutra, pratyayasya paracittajñānam. Now Vyasa, very briefly in his commentary, Vyasa says, pratyaye sanyamat, pratyayasya sakshatkaranat, tataha paracittajñānam. So he, in a sense, he only completes the sentence of the sutra, expands on it, elaborates. He says, a sanyama on the pratyaya, on the cognitive imprint, which is nothing but pratyayasya sakshatkaranam. So having a direct perception through the process of yoga, the yogaja pratyaksha of this pratyaya will lead to sakshatkarana tataha. From there it leads to paracittajñānam, the jnana of the chitta in question. So whichever chitta is the one on whom the yogi is doing sanyama, on whose pratyaya, on whose cognitive imprint or whose state the yogi is doing sanyama, yogi attains the jnanam, the knowledge of that chitta. So this is a very brief statement, but I think previously we had said that in one of the sutras the siddhi will be mentioned of how a yogi can attain knowledge of another's chitta, and this is the sutra that explains that. So on the sanyama on the pratyaya, he receives the jnana of the state of the other chitta. Now we could proceed to the next sutra because it is so connected, and then probably we could discuss them both. So in continuation, Sutra 3.20 it says, "Na ca tatsālambanaṃ tasyāviṣayībhūtatvāt." So this is not salambanam. It is not along with the alambanam, not along with the support. So what is being referred to by this? This means the paracittajñānam, the knowledge of the other chitta, is not salambanam. Means that there is a knowledge of the chitta and its state, but not the knowledge of its support. So it is not a salambanam knowledge. Now why would that be? The sutra itself answers that. The latter part of the sutra answers that. It says, tasyāviṣayībhūtatvāt. Because that is not the topic of the Sayyama. The Sayyama was done on the state of the Parachitta. It was not being done on the Alambanam of that Parachitta, not on the support of that Parachitta. And therefore, if there is a certain knowledge of a certain thing in that Parachitta, in that other Chitta, that actual object whose support that Chitta holds, that object is not the topic of the Sayyama that is happening. It's only that Parachitta and its state that is the topic. So it is that object is a avishayi-bhuta. So it is not a vishaya of the Sayyama. And therefore, the paracittajñānam doesn't include the knowledge of the support, the alambanam of the parachitta. And therefore, it says, na ca tatsālambanaṃ tasyāviṣayībhūtatvāt. Now, Vyasa elaborates and helps understand this a little bit further, albeit with the brief commentary. He says, raktam pratyayam janati amushmin alambane raktam iti na janati. So he sees that the yogi, when he does the Sayyama on a parachitta and the pratyaya of the parachitta, he gets the paracittajñānam, and he says that the chitta is colored in certain way. Okay, the colored could refer to attachment, aversion, etc. Anuraga, raga, raktam, all these are related terms. So raktam pratyam janati. It sees that the yogi realizes that this chitta has a raktam pratyayam. There is a certain coloring of the chitta. However, the yogi doesn't know that the jnanam doesn't include the fact that this coloring is coming from this particular object of support. It is coming from this alambanam. That is not part of the paracittajñānam. So it says, raktam pratyayam janati amushmin alambane raktam iti na janati. So that is not part of it. Parapratyayasya yad alambanam tat yogi chittena nalambanikrutam. So what is the reason? The reason is just that the alambanam of the parachitta pratyaya, so parapratyayasya yad alambanam. So if you think of a different chitta from the yogi's chitta, it has a certain object of cognition that it is being cognized. That object itself is not being made the focus of the Sayyama. And therefore, he says, nalambani kritam, na alambani kritam. So the Sayyama did not include that in its scope. And therefore, those are not the actual objects that the parachitta has used as a support. That is not part of the siddhi from the yogi's Sayyama. All the yogi's Sayyama gives him is the paracittajñānam, the state of the chitta, the fact that it is colored, etc. But the objects due to which it is colored, the ajnana of that object is not included in this Sayyama, because it is clearly not made the focus of the Sayyama. Then parapratyaya matram tu yogi chittasya alambani bhutam iti. So the parapratyaya matram, it is only the parapratyaya, the imprint of the other chitta, that is the only thing that has been made the focus of the Sayyama. So it is interesting here that how these Sayyamas and the Siddhis are being discussed. Okay? And Patanjali, we can see, is striving, Patanjali and Vyasa, to clearly bring out in a very practical way that if you do this Sanyama, this is the Siddhi you get. And they are being very specific and precise about it. What is included, what is excluded. It is almost as though a worldly discussion that we would do. That okay, when you try to get this, or this deal includes so and so, it does not include so and so. So the degree of familiarity with the Sanyama and the Siddhi sort of shines through in this discussion. That says, okay, this Sanyama will give you this, it does not include this because it is not in the scope of the Sanyama. And that is how this discussion is happening. And we have to remember why the Vibhuti Pada is discussing all this. And this has been mentioned earlier. It says a yogi who has attained or gained expertise, gained mastery over all the angas of the yoga, that yogi naturally wants to know, he has a bubutsa, naturally wants to know what are the different types of sanyamas and what does it lead to. And the Vibhuti Pada, it was said, is enumerating all these clearly. And therefore we are having this discussion. And this particular Sanyama was mentioned of how the Sanyama on the parapratyaya, the cognitive imprint of a certain different chitta, brings about the paracittajñānam. And then the discussion is what does it include and what does it not include. So very clearly it includes the chitta and its state, but it does not include the various objects outside of that other chitta whose influence can be seen in that chitta. But the objects themselves are not part of the jnanam that comes from the Sanyama. And in another text, there is some discussion on this. It says, Nanu cha ālambanam sanjananah katam amushmin rakta iti sanjanita iti. This is uchyate raktam amushmin iti samanyam vijanati. So the question is, if the yogi on the Sanyama knows that the chitta is colored in this manner and as such and such, how is it that it doesn't include the jnana of the actual object that led to the coloring? So that is answered. It says, Raktam amushminiti samanyam vijanati. In a general way, it is known that the parachitta, the other chitta, is colored in such and such way by such and such thing. That coloring could be a perception, it could be an attachment, etc., etc. It could be happiness, sorrow. So that coloring, the fact that the chitta is colored in such and such way by such and such thing is known in a general way. Na punaha sukha vishesham sukinaha pratyayasya ālambanībhūtam ālambate. Parapratyaya tu yogi chittasya ālambanībhūtam. So while in general terms it is known that with respect to this object or due to the influence of this object, etc., there is such and such coloring. However, sukha vishesham, the specifics of that in this example, the sukha, and the specifics of the object that brought about that sukha, that specific is not within the scope of the Sanyama or the Siddhi, and therefore that doesn't arise. And that is what the clarification of Patanjali and Vyasa means. That is made clear here in this follow-up sutra, where an attempt is made to clearly define what the parapratyaya Sanyama will lead to, what it will include and what it will not include. So these two sutras, Sutra 3.19 and 3.20, talk about this fourth Sanyama being discussed in this chapter.
So the samyama here is paracittajñānam. See, even we mortals, we want to know the minds of others. Not anybody's and everybody's mind, but we have some relationships and we want to know the mind of that person, that particular person. This is need of life, dynamics of life, that our loved ones, our kith and kin, our friends, we are interested to know their state of mind. And the strange thing and the unique thing about human face is that many times the face makes you understand the state of the mind of that person. That means if somebody is angry, by looking at the face of the person, you realize the person is angry. Or looking at the face of the person, you realize the person is sad or happy or delighted or excited or worried. So there is a great relationship between the face and expressive face and the state of mind. And of course, in exceptional cases, there are some people who do not make any expression of their state of mind. So we don't get any clue as to the state of the mind of that person, whether the person is happy or sad or delighted or worried or in anxiety or anger, attachment, etc., etc. So basically, we have the concept of face readers as well. Now, we generally have some idea about that person. When we meet a person, from the face we can make out, or from reactions the person gives, we can make out the person is angry. And therefore, we decide, let us not open the topic today. Looking at the mood of the person. So we can read the mood of the person as well. But here, the difference must be understood. This is samyama and there is sakshatkaranam. So although the face sometimes tells us about the state of the mind of a person, it is just our inference, extrapolation, and could be valid. But it's only inference. But here, this is the topic of samyama. And therefore, Vyasa makes it clear, bringing that expression of sakshatkaranat, tataha paracittajñānam. So this is different than our conjectures. The yogi has a different kind of faculty whereby it is not like our conjectures about the state of the mind of the other person. So that's a distinctive factor. If yogi is able to read somebody else's mind, it is going to be far more different than our reading the state of mind. We might also read the face of somebody's mind, read the mind, but then it would be just our conjecture, whereas here it is samyama. So it has definitely some speciality. And by looking at the face of the mind or the chitta making the object, somebody else's chitta, like we don't make every person's chitta as our object, but we want to make it as an object. Our person, our people, we certainly want to know their state of mind so that we can have better interactions. So the question can be also brought in, why the yogi wants to know somebody else's mind? Why does he want to interfere in somebody's state of mind? It is not like that. If yogi is getting out of samyama, we should know that there is such a reason whereby yogi needs to know the state of the mind of the other person. And therefore, he has special faculty because of the samyama that he will have paracittajñānam. And what is important to note is that this is certainly a different paracittajñānam that you and me and other mortals might be having. Many times we know the minds of others. And maybe that is valid, our reading is valid, but it doesn't have the depth as much as yogi has the depth. Ours is conjecture and yogi has sakshatkaranam because of samyama. So there's a big difference between conjecture and sakshatkaranam. So the point is, it is conjecture here. And just as you heard that these two sutras are related to each other, and that's why Srineet explained to you the 20th sutra as well. Tatsālambanaṃ tasyāviṣayībhūtatvāt. So even we will be able to read sometimes, in case of some people who are quite expressive and do not have inexpressive face, but expressive face, we know that person is happy, person is sad, person is angry. But then we cannot really make out a reason as to why person has such a mood or such a state of mind. We perhaps might be able to read the state of mind. Again, as I just now stated, it could be a conjecture. And similar is the case of yogi here, which is made express, that yogi will know the person and the state of mind of the person or thought content of the person, what is the person thinking about, but doesn't know the very thought as to which is the support for him to be angry or happy or sad or worried. Because that is not the support of samyama. The support of samyama is a state of mind of the other person and not the content of the state of the mind. So, yogi is also not able to have any judgment about it simply because it is avishayi. It is not the object of samyama. But however, he will know how is the state of mind. As Vyasa says, raktam pratyayam janati. So he will know whether the mind is an attachment or aversion or whatever is the state of mind at that point in time. But however, why it is that way, why it is happy or why it is sad would be again a conjecture, and it won't be sakshatkaranam. Like we are perhaps sometimes able to have conjecture why person is sad because we have some reasons and analysis and reasoning available, and therefore we think this is why the person might be angry, this is why the person might be sad. So that's again a conjecture. So in case of yogi also, he doesn't have the sakshatkaranam of that because that is not the object, that is not the support of samyama, and therefore why that state of mind is like that will not be known, which is the support for that mind to be happy, sad, or delighted, worried, etc., angry, etc. That is not the object of samyama, and therefore that will not be known. The point is ability to read somebody else's mind with which you have some kind of relationship or some kind of association and some kind of interaction. It is better that we have this ability rather than totally be blank about it. So we also feel a need that we must be able to know the state of the mind of a person whom we are meeting or whom we are going to meet. And therefore we can decide, if we are able to read, have little insight into it, that perhaps we can change our plans as well, that this is not the time to speak this topic to person and that topic to person with the person. So yogi needs that. It is not that he is trying to poke his nose in somebody else's business of life. But sometimes it becomes necessary that we should know the state of the mind of that person. Similarly, yogi feels the need. It is not that he is inquisitive about somebody else's, the private aspect of mind, as to what is in mind, etc. So there is a need. It's not like some people who poke the nose in somebody's private life. They want to know why someone is like this, etc., etc. So that's not the case here. But in some relation to with the relationships, sometimes the yogi needs. Suppose yogi is a guru and he has a shishya, or yogi himself is a shishya and he has a guru. And when he is going to interact as guru shishya, it is important for him to know the state of the other person, who is not some other person or any other person or every other person, but particular relationship is there. So it is really a facility for yogi to know the state of mind of the other person. But here it is definitely different than we intelligent mortals. Sometimes we also are able to read what is called as face reading for us. There is a science called face reading in the Jyotish Shastra, where they are able to get some depth about when they read about somebody's face, like astrologers. But yet, they will not be able to really know the cause of why a person is like that. So similarly, yogi will be not having sakshatkaranam of that, which is clarified in the 20th sutra, which is so important. So that's why the 19th sutra is followed by 20th sutra, and as she linked it quite properly, it is important to consider. So parachit is sakshatkar because of the samyama. This is the important point to note, and due thought must be invested into it as to understand what must be samyama and why the samyama might be there, and for what purpose the samyama is needed. Because this is totally different than we have interest in somebody else's life, neighbor's life. We want to know something about the neighbor, something about the other person. Such inquisitiveness is not there in yogi. This is also a point to be taken note of. Because samyama is samadhi. Samadhi is based on vairagya. So you should understand, I not just have a cavil here brought in, because without vairagya there won't be samadhi, and unless it is samadhi, it won't be samyama. So we should understand the background of the state of the mind and why paracittajñānam is needed. Like we just discussed about sarva bhuta ruta jnanam, which is necessary for a yogi to know what the other creatures are trying to express in their sounds, in their chirping, in their roars, or whatever it might be, cries, etc. So it is similarly to know the mind of other person. My person may not necessarily speak the mind. Many times we don't speak the mind. That's typical to human beings. Animals will never deceive in their sounds and noises and cries and whatever. But human being can cheat in voice and cheat in speech. So by speech, there's no way to know the mind of a human being. So yogi needs that samyama to read the paracittajñānam. It is not sufficient to read by somebody's eyes, because we also mortals can read from the eyes of a person. Person is angry, person is happy, person is sad, person is worried, person is disinterested. So that's how we do the paracittajñānam. But yogi's paracittajñānam is altogether different caliber. But however that is the case, yet there is limitation that the content of that state of the mind, the why behind the state of the mind, is not the object of samyama. Therefore, the why behind being happy, why behind being angry, etc., will not be subject matter of samyama. So this is a quite interesting revelation by Patanjali. And otherwise we might think these are some glories and miracles, etc. So the logic is very much in place when these two sutras are brought in. So that is about paracittajñānam. Okay.
Let us move on to the next sutra. This is Sutra 3.21. Once again, a brief sutra and a brief bhashya by Vyasa. This talks about the next Sanyama, which is the fifth being discussed. It says, kāyarūpasaṃyamāttadgrāhyaśaktistambhe cakṣuṣprakāśāsaṃyoge'ntardhānam. So, kāyarūpasaṃyamāt. So, kāyasya rūpam, kāyarūpam. Kāya means body. Rūpam means the form. Samyama is something we have already seen. What is Samyama? So now when the yogi does Samyama or attains the Samyama on the bodily form, then tadyāviṣayībhūtatvāt. Grahya Shakti is the yogyata or the shakti, the ability or the suitability of a certain object to be grasped by senses. So it is grahya, it can be grasped. By what? By indriyas. So for example, an object can be seen. So it can be grasped by the sense of sight. A certain sound can be heard. So it can be grasped by the sense of hearing, etc. So here what is said is that kāyarūpasaṃyamāttadgrāhyaśaktistambhe, when there is a sanyama on yogi's own bodily form, when the yogi performs sanyama, tadyāviṣayībhūtatvāt, then what happens is the shakti or the yogyata of the body to be grasped, to be one of a graspable thing. There is a cessation of it. So that is the stambanam. So there is a grāhyaśaktistambhanam. When in that situation, so tadyāviṣayībhūtatvāt, cakṣuṣprakāśāsaṃyoge'ntardhānam. So the contact of this body through the cakṣuṣprakāśa, if somebody else is seeing, it is described as there is a cakṣuṣprakāśa from the seer. Chakshu means the eye. Prakāśa is light, radiance, the one that illumines. So whatever that the thing that illumines coming from a certain eye of another person who is seeing, it does not come into contact with this body at all, because the body, there is a stambanam, there is a cessation of the grahya shakti, so it is no longer graspable, and therefore it doesn't get grasped by anybody who is seeing. So cakṣuṣprakāśa asamprayoge antardhānam. Antardhānam means it is as though even if present, it is not seen because it is not grasped, so it disappears, it vanishes. So in some sense, this is the power of invisibility, because the ability to be grasped by the sense of seeing is brought to a cessation that ceases, and therefore it is a siddhi, it is a vibhuti. So once again, kāyarūpasaṃyamāt, on sanyama of the bodily form by the yogi, tadyāviṣayībhūtatvāt, there is a cessation of the form of the body from being graspable. It is no longer graspable by the sense of sight, and therefore cakṣuṣprakāśa asamprayoge, the illumining power coming from the seeing of this someone else who is seeing from the eyes, that does not come into contact with this bodily form at all, because the bodily form is no longer suitable. The yogyata, the shakti to be grasped, to be a grahya, has gone away or has ceased. Therefore it cannot be seen, and therefore there is antardhānam, tadyāviṣayībhūtatvāt, cakṣuṣprakāśa asamprayoge. There is antardhānam. So that is what this sutra is essentially saying. Now, antardhānam, quite literally, it means being situated within, and therefore cannot be seen from outside. So it is antar plus dha plus a suffix called yut, so that leads to antardhānam. So in some sense, it is present, so it is situated within, but now cannot be seen from the outside. And just like one would describe, let's say, something like a black hole that exists but can never be seen. Here, the yogi would exist. The form, the bodily form, however, is no longer graspable, and therefore there is antardhānam. So that is the vibhuti coming from sanyama on the bodily form, on the kaya rupa. So that is the sutra. Now the Bhashya is quite brief. Vyasa says, Kāyasya rūpe sayyamād rūpasya ya grāhya shaktihi tam pratibadhnāti. So that sayyama on the form of the body, it obstructs the grahya shakti, the power that makes it graspable, or the yogyata, the suitability to be grasped, that is obstructed. Tam pratibadhnāti. Then grāhyaśaktistambhe sati, when that the suitability to be grasped, the power to be grasped, that has ceased, cakṣuṣprakāśāsaṃyoge'ntardhānam utpadyate yoginah. So when the bodily form can no longer be grasped, that is, the graspability has been ceased, then anybody who is looking, the ability of that look to illumine the body has gone away because the bodily form is no longer graspable, and therefore antardhanam utpadyate, it vanishes, it resides within, hidden from view. That is the more literal translation of what antardhanam would be, and that state arises of being residing within but not being graspable, hidden from view. Now, in this last sentence that I will be reading, Vyasa expands the scope of it. He says, Etena shabdadi antardhanam muktam veditavyam. So, yeah, by this it is to be understood that this refers not only to the rupa and the chakshu. The rupa as a vishaya, that is the form, the visual form, and chakshu as the seeing organ. It is not only that. Shabdadi antardhanam also. So hearing, etc. All the other sense organs and objects of senses, shabda, sparsha, rupa, rasa, gandha, all of them have been addressed, or all of these are within the scope, and veditavyam, it is to be understood. So when the sutra has been specified in the context of seeing and form, it is to be understood that it applies also to other sense organs and then objects of the senses. So this is the fifth sayama that in some sense gives the invisibility, but not invisibility cloak. So it says it is not that there is some invisibility cloak that is hiding it. It is the yogi, the form it goes within. There is antardhanam, and the ability to be grasped is seized. So that itself is a Shakti. So the conception here is whenever anything is seen, there is a Shakti which makes it grahya. So not only is the Shakti required to see, but there is a Shakti which makes something suitable to be seen. And that Shakti is removed or seized. It ceases operation. And therefore it is no longer seen. And thereby there is a invisibility or non-hearability, non-smellability, etc. So this is kāyarūpasaṃyamāttadgrāhyaśaktistambhe cakṣuṣprakāśāsaṃyoge'ntardhānam. So in some sense these are fascinating, but of course it is of the nature of vibhuti. So we can see that it is being explained very earnestly, listed one by one, though of course the details of the mechanisms, etc., we cannot understand. So we can read about it, look at what yoga, sanyama, etc., can bring about, and still see that it is being carefully listed by Patanjali and Vyasa. So this is Sutra 3.21.
So this is the siddhi or the miracle of the nature of disappearance. We hear about this, that yogis disappear. And so that's something that is miraculous power, and it's a miracle for us. Now, the logic behind such disappearance, the reasoning behind such disappearance is being mentioned. Like maybe some of the magicians effect this kind of disappearance, but the yogi, if when disappears, it would be a different way as to how he disappears. So what is that? how the disappearance is possible. And this is because of the samyama. Again, the power of samyama, effect of samyama. So kāyarūpasaṃyamāttadgrāhyaśaktistambhe. The samyama is on what? The samyama is on the kaya roopam. What is this kaya? Kaya is sharira. This is the kaya is this body. What is this body? The body is panchabhautika. Prithvi, Ap, Tej, Vayu, Akash. So these elements are metaphysical actually. If you recall that sutra which dealt with vitarka, vichara, ananda, smrita, samadhi, with the mahabhutas came in vitarka category and mahabhutas were metaphysical. It is not like solid matter, liquid matter and gaseous matter. That is physics. The body actually is panchabhautika. So panchabhautika, panchamahabhutas they are invisible elements. They are not visible elements. So that's a grade of matter. We are aware of physical matter and then we know it is gaseous, it is solid, it is liquid, it is having some color, some form, some shape, etc., etc. That's physical matter. But the kaya, body, is made up of panchamahabhutas. And each of the mahabhuta is actually invisible by itself by being metaphysical, essentially. So kāyarūpasaṃyamāttadgrāhyaśaktistambhe. The kaya roopam is that it is of 5 elements, quintuplication of 5 elements. And samyama on that, because a lay person might have this question, how is this samyama done? Like you stand in front of full-size mirror and you get the form of your body and you say, this is my kaya roopam. So there is appearancy form. And that is not an object of samyama. So kaya roopa should be understood that it is in the realm of metaphysics, but not in the realm of physics, that you can stand in front of the full-size mirror and get the form of your body and you know the complexion of your body, shape of your body, etc., etc. So kaya roopam, when it is a samyama object, it is totally different than a physical form of oneself. Yogi is not going to look at his own physical form for samyama. The samyama objects are always different, of which you should be now aware of. So kāyarūpasaṃyamāttadgrāhyaśaktistambhe. So when there is samyama, then additionally something has to be done. Tadgrāhyaśaktistambhe cakṣuṣprakāśāsaṃyoge'ntardhānam. And you've just now heard beautiful description of antardhanam, because in English we say disappearance. It is not just disappearance. It is something antar, going inwardly. That is going into metaphysical constitution of the body. And Grāhyaśaktistambhe. How do you get the vision? What is disappearance? Disappearance is always a visual aspect. That means it is a visible object and visual object. And the visual object can disappear. So how do you get the visual object's perception, visual perception? It's just object being there, you don't get the perception. The place will be illuminated. Now, if the place is illuminated, it's not that the objects become visible. Objects will radiate light. And that light rays will fall into your eyes. And that's how you will have visual perception. It's not that way. In a dark room, things are not visible and you put on the light, you get the visibility. It is not that you sight the objects. The visual perception is such that the object will radiate colors, light rays. Like moon has a reflected light and therefore the moon is seen. So similarly, objects get the light, and when the light falls on the objects will radiate some rays, and therefore you are able to know about the form of the object, what is the shape of the object, the dimensions of the object, the colors of the object. So it is game of light rays coming from that object. So that's how the visual perception takes place. So the rays reach the eyes, and then you come to know this is rose, this is elephant, this is square, this is triangle, this is black, this is yellow, this is blue. It is not that object is blue and therefore you see it blue, not that object is black and therefore you see that black as black, or it's not that object is elephant and therefore you see that as elephant. So the visual perception has to be understood here, how it takes place. So the light rays enter the eyes, and then you have a reflection, like mirror reflects. There is a reflection caught in the part of the eyes, and that tells you that this is rose, this is lotus, this is elephant, etc., and their color, their shape, their form. Now here, that's the eyes have grahya shakti. They have grasping power of light rays of various colors. And that's why we get that visual perception. Now, if that is obstructed, the light rays will not reach the eyes. Suppose there is a lotus, but I have kept a wall in front of the rose. The rose will emit the light rays, but the wall is obstructing it, and therefore it will not fall on the eyes, and therefore eyes will not see the rose, but eyes will see only the wall. So the obstruction is the thing for light rays. If the obstruction is there, the light rays won't reach. So yogi is able to obstruct the rays coming from his body, which are emitted by his body, and therefore the light rays do not reach the eye organ, retina in the eyes, and therefore they will not be able to catch the object. Now, in case of the example, I said rose is veiled by a wall. Now here the stambhanam will take place because the kāyarūpasaṃ is panchabhautika. Each of the panchamahabhuta is something that is not a physical object, doesn't have shape and color and form. Like when it's an immaculately clear glass, clean glass, we don't see the glass, but we see through the glass. We can see what is beyond the glass, but the glass is absolutely clean, immaculately clean, clear. So we fail to see the glass, but we see what is beyond the glass. And you know the story in Mahabharata, that Duryodhana thought that it is open window, and he proceeds further and dashes against the glass, because the glass was so clean that he could not see the glass, because glass is a see-through object. Glass doesn't show itself. It is see-through kind of object. You see through the glass. So similarly here, because if the light rays are not emitted, then you will see only black. No light is emitted, means it will be black vision, like case of black hole. Why it is called black hole? Because no light is emitted by black hole, by that hole, and therefore it is called black hole. Now here the Kaya Rupa is Panchabhautika, and they don't have any color, form, shape. They are metaphysical, and therefore no light ray will be emitted, and therefore there will be see-through like condition. So one will see through what is beyond yogi, behind yogi, and therefore the yogi will not be seen at all. This is the power of sanyama. Otherwise, if the yogi is disappearing, then you should perhaps argue and say it should be black color. But yogi disappears. He is in the spot. He doesn't move from the spot. But yogi, suppose he becomes like a clean glass. It becomes see-through. Yogi would become see-through object and would so see what is behind the yogi rather than seeing the yogi. So that's why kāyarūpasaṃyama is different than the kāyarūpasaṃyama perception, pratyaksham. We have kāyarūpa pratyaksham. Stand in front of the mirror, we have the kāyarūpa pratyaksham. But it is samyama. In samyama, the perception of that object is totally different. Like our perception of rose and yogi's samadhi on rose would diverge different things. And if you recall, we said all dimensional knowledge would come in samadhi, while our knowledge is only two-dimensional, at the most three-dimensional. So there is a lot of interesting purport here. Basically, we have to understand kāyarūpasaṃyamāttadgrāhyaśaktistambhe. What is the object of samyama? Kāyarūpa. Not the kāyarūpa or the form and shape and color of the body, like we identify someone from their shape and form, and then we have likes and dislikes about the person. I like this person because of appearance. I don't like this person because of appearance. Complexion of the person, shape of the person, form of the person. We like or we don't like. But here, understand samyama coming in vairagya bhumi. So there would be no room for such. And then what is the object of that kaya? It is the metaphysical constitution of elements in it. And the samyama takes place there. And therefore, the grāhyaśaktistambhe would take place because Panchamabhutas don't have form to show, color to show, shape to show. And therefore, yogi will be disappearing. So what is behind yogi would be visible, and therefore you say yogi has become invisible. It doesn't become a dark and black spot or black kind of thing that you are not able to see. So that's how the Yentardhānam has been spoken, and some reasoning has been given. Grāhyaśaktistambhe, cakṣuṣprakāśāsaṃyoge'ntardhānam. Therefore, the chakshu, the eyes, will not contact the light. Unless the eyes contact the light rays, eyes don't have perception. So that stambhanam also will take place. And that's how the yogi would be disappearing. So it's not disappearance like magicians might do. The hypnotist or by mesmerism one might do. This is samyama, totally different. Okay.
Yes. So very briefly, just to clarify, the Grahya Shakti refers to the ability to an object to be grasped. Okay. And the conception of the operation of indriyas in traditionally in Nyaya Shastra, etc., accepted here also, is as though there is a prakasha coming out of the seer's eye and reaching the object being seen. And in this case, the object being seen is also described to have a certain grahya shakti, to be graspable. And when that contact happens between the prakasha and the object, so that is known as samprayoga, only then vision occurs, and that is when it can be seen. In this case, because the grahya shakti is ceased, its operation is ceased, the contact never happens, so there is asamprayoga, and therefore it cannot be seen. And then it says asamprayoge'ntardhānam. So with this, we finished the Sutra 3.21. We'll stop here for today.
And one more point. Similarly, you say there is Prashantardhanam, Rasantardhanam, Gandhantardhanam, etc. So with refers to the other elements, the 5 elements, which are Prithvi, Tej, Vayu, Akash. So there will be all kinds of disappearance. Therefore, you will not be getting those perceptions. Like there is smell aspect to a body, like vision aspect, form aspect is there. There are other aspects as well, such as shabda, sparsha, rupa, rasa, and gandha, 5. So therefore, disappearance can be also affected by the different sanyamas, as mentioned here about the prakasha, cakṣuṣprakāśāsaṃyoge'ntardhānam, or the grahya shakti of visual aspects, visual form. There are other forms to human beings as well, or yogi, and he can also be affecting a disappearance in all those various realms, taking into consideration the process of those, how the ears have perception, how the olfactory organ has perception, how the tactile organ has its perception, how the gustatory organ has its perception. So those are 5 elements with regards to which we have 5 senses, and they have 5 processes to which we get 5 kinds of knowledges. So all such antardhanas are also mentioned in the same sutra by extrapolation as to how it might be. We should know the process of shabda object and shabda grahanam, sparsha object and sparsha grahanam, etc., etc. Okay.
Let us recite the shlokas and Guruji and stop for today. Vaijñānikam pravaktatva āsaneshu kalavidam yogābhyāse ca tattvajñam vandeham sundaram gurum yoga vriksho hi lokesmin yatreranena varditah yogācārya guro tubhyam sundarāya namo namaha. Thank you.